While the world is focused on the Russia-Ukraine conflict, China has been making moves on the down low. Their alleged plan to seize control of Myanmar is well underway. You might ask, why Myanmar? Why now? Well, there's several strategic reasons for that. Join us as we uncover China's insane plan, the game. Myanmar is a golden goose for China. It holds China's commercial and strategic interests and gives them speedy access to the Indian Ocean. Resources from there are essential for sustaining China's economy. Upper-class Chinese people are drawn to Kachin jade. Plus, Myanmar plays a significant role in China's goal for the Belt and Road Initiative, which is exactly why China has gradually increased its interests in Myanmar over the past few years through three distinct but related channels: private investors, primarily in Mandalay and northern Myanmar, corporations investing in industrial estates and farmland, and state-level investments in long-term development projects like oil and gas pipelines from Kyaukphyu to Kunming. But for these investments to be successful, Myanmar must have peace and stability, right? Chinese institutions and people are all too aware that ethnic Chinese families and companies can become victims very fast when there is internal unrest. And because of violent uprisings against the government and many opposing factions, such unrest is rampant throughout Myanmar, particularly in the northern border districts. Another danger to law and order comes from the cash-based traffic in illegal drugs and valuable stones. So, what did they do? Try to control the situation, but for their own gain. When China closed its border with Myanmar in September 2020 because of COVID, the impact was felt right away. Farmers and businesses on both sides were unable to afford the loss of such revenue because border trade between the two nations at the Meuse crossing alone was worth more than $3.4 million per day. Then, after the military takeover of Myanmar in February 2021, there were significant riots throughout the nation, some of which included assaults against Chinese-controlled companies in Yangon and other cities, which revealed an ugly truth. The Chinese government is accused by many in Myanmar of aiding the coup for political or arms sales purposes. Riots between the Tatmadaw, the Myanmar military, and the Kachin Independence Army are making the situation in Kachin State particularly volatile. Although the new military rules claim to defend Chinese-invested factories, their protection does not extend to every part of the nation. And as the Russia-Ukraine crisis worsens, Myanmar's military government has been holding emergency meetings. The junta of this Southeast Asian country is reportedly growing more concerned that Beijing might take advantage of the shifting attention to invade Myanmar, the invisible hand. Since the military takeover in 2021, there's been simmering anti-China sentiment in Myanmar, sometimes not all that far below the surface. Some citizens believe Beijing supported the military's overthrow of the democratically elected government. In fact, a majority of Burmese who are opposing their new regime have a strong suspicion that China approved the military takeover against Myanmar's democratic government. And you know what? Maybe evidence of this dirty work will surface eventually. But for the time being, it's evident that China has consciously decided to involve its interests in Myanmar in the upheaval that has followed the army's seizure of power. Now Beijing must choose between maintaining its implicit approval of the general system and changing its policies to preserve investments in its southern neighbor. But with both Russia and the West preoccupied with the Ukraine conflict, Myanmar's loathsome and paranoid generals may be forced to turn to Beijing in order to hold on to their positions of authority. This isn't anything new either. Long-held suspicions of China's influence in Myanmar led to the country being labeled a client state of China. And since decades, governments have worked to diversify their control in Myanmar by controlling its internal and external affairs. From the background, of course, the plan. So, how do you gain control of a country without looking like the bad guy? Create conflict within the country, then swoop in to save the day, of course. China has learnt this technique well from its Western counterparts. The most cynical course of action has been taken by China. The best-case scenario for Beijing may be a deteriorating situation short of a total collapse and fall into disorder, assuming that China is, above all, opposed to any direct Western intervention and military presence in Myanmar. Any attempts to normalize relations between Western democracies and the military government in Nay Pyi Taw would be impossible if political instability, violent repression, and perhaps even a resurgence of internal conflict with some of the ethnic armed organizations kept going on. China is well aware that the generals in Myanmar will eventually turn to them for strategic support in such a situation of domestic repression and international isolation. To be honest, the current state of affairs appears to be the best-case scenario for China. The Tatmadaw are busy on the defensive and fighting for survival. This gives China the advantage in any future negotiations with its military counterparts in Myanmar. In fact, the recent developments in Myanmar, including the establishment of a national unity government to oppose the junta and the first steps towards the construction of a potential federal armed resistance front, will undoubtedly be watched closely by China. However, if things could mean a return of the West in its backyard, possibly with India, it won't take any decisive measure to resolve the internal unrest. They know they need to play it safe, the wrong moves. Even then, China appears to be deviating from its official advice for foreign investment, which is to stay away from crisis zones by striking significant deals with Myanmar's military government. Although there's a rising insurgency in Myanmar and the country is in a condition of collapse, China is still moving forward with its ambitions for a complicated economic corridor there as the military announces plans to push major joint venture projects. The general's attempts to look in charge of the situation is clear. China, though, appears to have stumbled into a trap. Making friends with the junta damages its reputation in regional organizations and puts its investments at risk both now and in the future. Beijing should exert pressure on the junta to rein in its widespread violence against the populace and to reinstate the elected administration in order to defend its interests. It's almost like they can't decide which side to be on. On May 2, 2023, junta leader Min Aung Hlaing was informed by Chinese Foreign Minister Qin Gang that China stands with Myanmar on the international stage. In Naypyidaw, the capital of Myanmar, the leader of the country's military-run government shook hands with the visiting minister, who was the highest-ranking Chinese official to meet the top general since the overthrow more than 2 years ago. But here's the thing. Analysts claim that Beijing also supports and provides weapons to a number of ethnic rebel groups along its border with Myanmar. In fact, following the coup, some of these organizations engaged in frequent combat with the Myanmar military, prompting an alliance of rebels supported by China to request Beijing's assistance in March to defuse the situation. Ethnic tensions. It's plain as day. China has taken advantage of the situation for its own economic gain, while the people of Myanmar continue to suffer. Trade and business with China serve to fund the Burmese army, undermine Western sanctions, and prolong the war. They've also defied international arms embargoes by supplying the Tatmadaw with weapons, including a submarine. Plus, Myanmar is also assisting Russia in getting through international sanctions in order to buy fighter jets, armored personal vehicles, and truck-mounted rocket launchers from Moscow. Yep, it's all a mixed bag of mess. But here's where it all becomes clear. With about 30,000 soldiers, the United WA State Army, or UWSA, is one of the biggest non-state armed forces in the world and the biggest ethnic armed group in Myanmar. Along with their native tongues and Burmese, many UWSA officers also speak Mandarin and some of them have Chinese names. The head of the UWSA is Bao Yoxiang. Zhao Zhongtang is his assistant. Even though it's technically part of Shan State, they call it the Wa State. The Wa believe they're separate from Beijing, yet they must listen to China. According to a UWSA leader, they need to stick with China, even if they exert influence and try to manipulate them. Their link with this armed group is necessary to keep the dictators in check. Time and again, Muslims, Buddhists, and Christians in the country become targets of surges of violence. And there's a strong possibility that Myanmar's violent cycle will continue. So, in this entire game between China, the Burmese army, and armed groups, ethnic minorities will be used as pawns in a deadly power struggle. As Sun Tzu once said, "In the midst of chaos, there is also opportunity." You know that's how China sees it. Let us know what you think China's next move will be in Myanmar. Make sure to subscribe to our channel for more. We'll see you in the next video.